The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of Zephyr Station, their piercing wail echoing off metallic walls as crew members scrambled in panic. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed herself against the cold bulkhead, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the frantic communications crackling over the intercom. All personnel to emergency stations. Code Black protocol is now in effect. The Vorthak specimen has breached containment. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The Vorthak, a nightmare creature captured from the war zones of Kepler 442b, was loose on the station. She had seen the classified footage of what these beasts could do to armored Marines in seconds. Their razor-sharp claws could slice through titanium plating like paper, and their acidic saliva could melt through blast doors. The military had brought this one aboard for weapons research. Despite her protests as the station's xenobiologist, heavy footsteps thundered past her hiding spot as security teams rushed toward the containment sector. Sarah knew she should head to the evacuation pods like everyone else, but something nagged at her scientific mind. In all her years studying alien life forms, she had noticed patterns that others missed. The Vorthak's biometric readings had been unusual for the past week. Not aggressive spikes, but something else entirely. The lights flickered overhead, and Sarah heard a wet, sliding sound echoing from the ventilation shafts above. Her blood ran cold as she realized the creature was using the air ducts to move through the station undetected. The sound grew closer, accompanied by a low rumbling that seemed to vibrate through the metal floors. Commander Hayes's voice boomed over the intercom again. "Attention all personnel. The creature has killed 3 security officers in Section C. It appears to be heading toward the civilian quarters. All civilians are ordered to remain in locked rooms until further notice." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process this information. The civilian quarters were in the opposite direction from the usual escape routes these creatures would take when freed from captivity. In her experience, newly liberated specimens always sought the quickest path to open space or the nearest shuttle bay. This behavior was completely wrong. A soft thud came from somewhere nearby, followed by an almost inaudible whimpering sound. Sarah frowned. She had never heard a Vorthak make such a noise. Their vocal range typically consisted of bone-chilling roars and aggressive chittering sounds. This was something entirely different, almost plaintive in nature. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Sarah crept toward the sound. She had dedicated her life to understanding alien behavior, and this situation presented a puzzle that demanded investigation. The whimpering came again, definitely closer now, mixed with what sounded like labored breathing. As she rounded the corner into a maintenance corridor, Sarah's flashlight beam caught something that made her freeze in absolute terror. There, hunched in the shadows between 2 massive cooling units, was the Vorthak. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall even in its crouched position, its midnight black exoskeleton gleaming under the emergency lighting. 6 arms ending in wickedly curved talons hung at its sides, and its elongated skull housed rows of teeth that could crush bones like breadcrumbs. But something was wrong with this picture. The creature wasn't displaying any of the aggressive postures she had studied in the military files. Its head was lowered, almost submissive, and those deadly arms were wrapped around what appeared to be its torso in an almost protective gesture. The whimpering was definitely coming from the beast itself. Sarah's training kicked in despite her terror. She had spent years learning to read alien body language, and everything about this creature's posture screamed distress rather than aggression. The acidic drool that should have been pooling beneath its jaws was absent, and its breathing seemed rapid and shallow, signs of panic rather than predatory excitement. The creature's multiple eyes suddenly focused on her, and Sarah prepared to die. Instead of the expected charge, however, the Vorthak simply stared at her with what she could only describe as desperate hope. One of its clawed hands moved slowly, deliberately pointing toward its own chest where she now noticed several blinking lights embedded in the exoskeleton. Medical monitoring devices. Sarah's scientific mind began piecing together the puzzle. These weren't natural parts of the creature's anatomy. They were implants probably installed during its captivity. Her heart sank as she realized what this might mean. The creature wasn't just a prisoner of war. It was a test subject, possibly subjected to experiments that had left it in constant pain. The Vorthak took a tentative step toward her, moving with obvious difficulty. Sarah noticed for the first time that several of its legs seemed to be favoring injuries, and there were fresh scars along its flanks where someone had clearly been taking tissue samples. This wasn't a wild beast on a rampage, and this was a tortured creature seeking help. "You're hurt," Sarah whispered, surprising herself by speaking aloud. The creature's head tilted at the sound of her voice, and the whimpering stopped. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, human and alien simply looked at each other across the narrow corridor. Then the creature did something that changed everything. It lowered itself to the ground, folding those deadly claws beneath its body, and extended its elongated neck toward her in what was unmistakably a gesture of trust. In that moment, Sarah realized that everything she had been told about the Vorthak was wrong. This wasn't a mindless killing machine. This was an intelligent being capable of recognizing friend from foe, kindness from cruelty. The sound of approaching boots echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the whine of charging plasma rifles. Sarah had seconds to make a decision that would determine both their fates. Sarah's mind raced as the sound of military boots grew closer. The Vorthak remained in its submissive position, those ancient eyes watching her with an intelligence that made her chest tighten with emotion. She could hear Commander Hayes barking orders to his team, their voices filled with the kind of cold determination that preceded a massacre. "There's blood here, sir. The creature definitely came this way. Set weapons to full power. I want that thing vaporized the moment we see it." Sarah looked down at the injured alien before her, noticing details she had missed in her initial terror. The creature's breathing was becoming more labored, and a thin, silver fluid was seeping from between the medical implants on its chest. Whatever the military scientists had done to it, the creature was dying slowly and in obvious agony. Without fully understanding her own actions, Sarah stepped between the Vorthak and the approaching soldiers. She pulled off her white lab coat and draped it over the creature's distinctive black head, hoping to buy them precious seconds. The alien didn't resist her touch, instead pressing its massive form closer to the cooling units where the shadows were deepest. "This way, Dr. Chen," she whispered urgently, gesturing toward a maintenance hatch she had noticed earlier. "Can you move quietly?" The creature's response astonished her. It nodded, an unmistakably human gesture that somehow looked natural when performed by this alien being. More remarkably, when it began to move, it did so with a grace and stealth that seemed impossible for something of its size. Each step was placed with deliberate care, avoiding the metal grating that would have announced their presence to the security team. They slipped through the maintenance hatch, just as the soldiers rounded the corner. Sarah found herself in a narrow service tunnel that ran between the station's outer hall and the main corridors. The space was barely wide enough for her to stand upright, but the Vorthak moved through it with surprising ease, its 6 limbs allowing it to navigate the cramped conditions better than she could. "Sector clear, Commander. No sign of the creature. Keep searching. That thing couldn't just disappear." Sarah's hands were shaking as she led the way through the tunnel system. She was committed now. Helping an escaped alien weapon could be considered treason under wartime regulations, but every time she looked back at the creature following her, she saw something that military reports had failed to mention: profound sadness in those multifaceted eyes. They emerged from the tunnel system into Sarah's private laboratory, a space she had specifically requested be located away from the main research areas. Here, surrounded by her life's work on alien biology and behavior, she finally felt safe enough to really examine her unexpected companion. The Vorthak immediately moved to the far corner of the room, positioning itself where it could watch both the door and the ventilation grates. Tactical awareness that spoke of intelligence and military training. But then it did something that surprised her even more. It began to clean its claws methodically, removing what appeared to be traces of blood. "You didn't kill those security officers, did you?" Sarah asked softly. The creature stopped its grooming and looked directly at her. After a moment of what seemed like internal debate, it shook its head slowly. The gesture was so human, so deliberate, that Sarah felt her scientific worldview shifting fundamentally. She moved slowly to her computer terminal and pulled up the security feeds from earlier in the day. What she found made her stomach turn. The 3 killed security officers were very much alive, unconscious but breathing, with precise pressure point strikes that had knocked them out without causing permanent damage. The Vorthak had deliberately used non-lethal force despite having weapons capable of cutting through their armor like tissue paper. "They're going to kill you," Sarah said, turning back to face the creature. "Even though you didn't hurt anyone, they'll say you're too dangerous to live." The Vorthak's response was to reach into a fold of its exoskeleton and withdraw something that made Sarah's breath catch. It was a small crystalline device that pulsed with soft blue light, clearly alien technology but not Vorthak in origin. The creature placed it carefully on her workbench and then backed away, as if offering her a gift. Sarah approached the device cautiously. Her scanner immediately began detecting energy signatures unlike anything in human databases. This wasn't just alien technology. It was alien technology from a species they had never encountered. The implications were staggering. "Where did you get this?" she asked. But the creature simply pointed to itself and then to the stars beyond the laboratory's viewport. Sarah's mind began racing with possibilities. If the Vorthak had contact with other alien species that humanity had never met, then this creature represented far more than just a weapon to be studied. A soft chiming sound from the crystal device drew her attention. Holographic symbols began appearing in the air above it, clearly some form of communication system. The Vorthak moved closer, its earlier caution replaced by something that looked like hope. "You're trying to contact someone," Sarah realized aloud, "someone who might be looking for you." The creature's nod was emphatic this time, and it began manipulating the holographic display with surprising dexterity. The symbols shifted and changed, forming patterns that were obviously meaningful but completely alien to Sarah's understanding. However, one element of the display was universally recognizable: a star map, with one particular system highlighted in pulsing red. "That's where you're from," Sarah said, and the creature's entire posture seemed to brighten. "And someone there is waiting for you to come home." The laboratory door suddenly chimed with an incoming security override. Commander Hayes' voice followed immediately. "Dr. Chen, we know you're in there. We have the corridor sealed. Come out immediately and bring the creature with you." Sarah looked from the door to the Vorthak, who had gone rigid with fear. The alien's claws were extending involuntarily, a defensive reflex that would only confirm the military's view of it as a dangerous weapon. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they overrode her laboratory's locks. "Trust me," she whispered to the creature, then spoke louder toward the door. "Commander, I'm conducting an emergency medical examination of the specimen. It appears to be suffering from systemic toxin exposure from your experiments. That's not your concern, Doctor. Stand away from the creature immediately." Sarah's mind raced as she stared at the star map still glowing above the alien device. Somewhere in that distant system, others like this creature were probably waiting for news of their lost comrade. The thought of what would happen if the roles were reversed, if humans discovered that one of their people was being tortured in an alien laboratory, made her decision crystallize with sudden clarity. "I'm sorry, Commander, but I can't do that. This creature is under my protection now." The laboratory door exploded inward as Commander Hayes and his security team breached the entrance. Sarah instinctively moved to shield the Vorthak, but the creature was no longer cowering in the corner. Instead, it had positioned itself protectively in front of her, its massive frame serving as a living barrier between the armed soldiers and the human who had shown it kindness. "Stand down, creature," Hayes barked, his plasma rifle trained on the alien's center mass. "Dr. Chen, step away from that thing immediately." "Commander, wait," Sarah called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I've made a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about this species." Hayes' jaw tightened behind his tactical helmet. "The only thing I need to know is that this monster killed 3 of my people and needs to be terminated." "That's just it. It didn't kill anyone," Sarah insisted, gesturing toward her computer screen. "Check your own medical bay records. Those officers are unconscious but unharmed. This creature deliberately used non-lethal force when it could have easily killed them." The Vorthak remained motionless, but Sarah could see the tension in its muscles as it prepared to defend her if necessary. One wrong move from the security team would trigger a bloodbath that would prove the military's point about alien aggression. "Sir," one of the soldiers said hesitantly, touching his communication device. "Medical bay confirms all 3 officers are stable. Unconscious but no permanent damage." Hayes' grip on his weapon tightened. "That doesn't change the fact that it's a security threat. These creatures are bred for war, Doctor. It's probably just saving energy for a larger attack." Sarah felt the Vorthak tense at the word bred, and she suddenly understood something crucial about the creature's behavior. "Commander, what if they're not bred for war? What if they're conscripted just like human soldiers?" "That's impossible. Intelligence reports confirm these creatures are mindless killing machines. Then explain this, Sarah said, activating the holographic display from the alien device. The star map filled the air between them, causing several soldiers to take involuntary steps backward. This creature was trying to contact its home when you arrived. It showed me exactly where it came from, and based on the complexity of this technology, we're dealing with a highly advanced civilization. The Vorthak made a low, warbling sound that Sarah was beginning to recognize as an attempt at communication. It moved one clawed hand slowly toward the holographic display, touching specific points that caused new information to cascade across the projection. "What's it doing?" Hayes demanded, but his weapon had lowered slightly as he watched the complex interaction between alien and machine. "I think it's trying to show us something important," Sarah replied, studying the new symbols that had appeared. "Computer, can you run a translation algorithm on these patterns?" "Negative, Dr. Chen. The mathematical base and linguistic structure are completely outside human parameters." The Vorthak looked from the display to Sarah, then did something that made everyone in the room freeze. It began to vocalize, but instead of the threatening roars they expected, it produced a series of melodic tones that were almost song-like in their complexity. The holographic display responded to these sounds, shifting and changing to show what appeared to be historical records. Images began forming in the light, crude at first, but becoming clearer as the creature refined its vocalizations. Sarah gasped as she recognized what she was seeing: a peaceful alien civilization, cities that floated among crystalline trees, and Vorthak-like beings engaged in what appeared to be artistic and scientific pursuits. "They're not warriors by nature," Sarah whispered, her scientific mind racing to process the implications. "They're scholars, artists, scientists, just like us." The display shifted again, showing darker images now, massive ships descending from space, cities burning, and the peaceful Vorthak beings herded into containment facilities. The creature's song took on a mournful quality that needed no translation. This was the story of a conquered people. "Sir," another soldier spoke up, his voice tight with emotion, "if this is accurate, then we've been fighting enslaved civilians, not enemy soldiers." Hayes remained silent for a long moment, studying the alien's historical record. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier aggression. "How do we know this isn't some kind of propaganda? Alien psychological warfare?" Sarah was about to respond when the Vorthak did something that answered the question more eloquently than words ever could. It reached toward one of the medical implants in its chest and, with obvious pain, began to remove the device. Silver fluid leaked from the wound, but the creature continued its work until it held the implant out toward Hayes. "Computer, scan this device," Sarah ordered quickly. The results appeared on her screen within seconds, and she felt sick as she read them. "Commander, this is a neural control implant. It's designed to suppress higher brain functions and increase aggressive responses. Someone has been artificially turning these people into weapons." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Several soldiers lowered their weapons entirely, staring at the wounded alien with new understanding. The Vorthak, seemingly sensing the change in atmosphere, began to remove more of the implants, each one adding to the growing pile of evidence on Sarah's workbench. "Who did this to you?" Sarah asked softly, but she already suspected the answer. The creature's song resumed, and the holographic display showed new images, alien beings that Sarah didn't recognize, with sleek silver ships and technology that was clearly more advanced than anything either humans or Vorthak possessed. The true enemy revealed themselves in the display, the puppeteers who had been orchestrating a war between two species that should have been natural allies. "The hegemony," Hayes breathed, recognizing the ships from classified intelligence reports. "We've been chasing shadows while the real enemy watched us destroy each other." The Vorthak nodded emphatically, then gestured toward the star map again. New markers appeared, showing not just its home system but dozens of others, all marked with the same ominous red that indicated hegemony presence. "It's not just about this one creature," Sarah realized. "There are others like it, probably thousands of them, all being held as prisoners and forced to fight against their will." The creature reached toward Sarah, moving slowly so as not to trigger the soldier's defensive instincts. When she didn't pull away, it gently placed one massive claw on her shoulder, a gesture that was unmistakably grateful. Then it turned toward the holographic display and began a new song, one that showed star charts and tactical information that made Hayes step forward with sudden interest. "Is it offering to help us?" the commander asked incredulously. Sarah watched the alien's face carefully as it continued to manipulate the display. The sadness was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Determination. I think it's offering to guide us to where the others are being held. It wants to help us free its people. The laboratory fell silent except for the creature's melodic vocalizations and the soft humming of the holographic projector. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would reshape the entire war. The question was whether they had the courage to act on what they had learned. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in the most surreal situation of her career. The creature she had once feared now sat beside her in the station's main conference room, methodically working through a bowl of synthesized nutrients, while Admiral Morrison and his senior staff watched in fascination. The Vorthak had insisted on being properly fed before sharing more tactical information, a reasonable request that had somehow humanized the situation for everyone involved. "So let me understand this correctly," Admiral Morrison said, leaning forward across the polished table. "This individual was essentially a university professor before the hegemony invaded their homeworld?" Sarah nodded, glancing at the alien beside her. Over the past few hours, they had developed a rudimentary communication system, using the holographic display combined with simple gestures. Professor Kethvar was a xenobiologist specializing in interspecies communication theory. The irony is almost overwhelming. The creature, Kethvar as Sarah had learned to call him, looked up from his meal and activated the holographic display again. New images appeared showing what appeared to be a massive research facility where Vorthak individuals were being systematically processed through some kind of neural modification procedure. The conditioning centers, Admiral Morrison observed grimly. Our intelligence suspected they existed, but we never had proof. Kethvar's song took on an urgent quality as he manipulated the display to show a real-time tactical situation. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the star system from earlier, but now it was showing active military formations and what appeared to be a rescue operation already in progress. "Admiral," Commander Hayes said, studying the display intently, "if I'm reading this correctly, there's already a resistance movement among the Vorthak. They're attempting to liberate the conditioning centers themselves." The holographic images shifted to show Vorthak ships, sleeker and more elegant than the brutal war vessels they had been fighting, engaging hegemony forces in desperate battles across multiple systems. It was clear that the resistance was badly outgunned and taking heavy casualties. Kethvar stood up from his chair and moved to the center of the room, his massive presence commanding everyone's attention. When he began to sing again, the holographic display expanded to fill the entire space around them, creating an immersive tactical overview that made several officers gasp in amazement. "He's showing us their entire strategic situation," Sarah realized. "This level of trust is extraordinary." The display revealed the scope of the hegemony's operations. Hundreds of worlds under their control, countless species enslaved and turned into biological weapons, and a military machine that dwarfed anything humanity had ever faced. But it also showed weaknesses, supply lines that could be disrupted, command centers that were vulnerable to coordinated attacks, and most importantly, the location of every conditioning center in hegemony space. "Why is he sharing this with us?" Admiral Morrison asked quietly. "His people barely know we exist." Kethvar heard the question and manipulated the display to show something that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. It was a recording of human forces helping Vorthak civilians escape from a destroyed colony ship, an incident from early in the war that had been classified at the highest levels. "You were there," Sarah said to Admiral Morrison, recognizing his younger face in the holographic record. "You saved their people." Morrison's eyes widened as he watched his own actions replayed in alien technology. "How does he know about that?" "We pulled maybe 30 survivors from that wreck before the hegemony reinforcements arrived." Kethvar's response came through the display, images showing those same 30 Vorthak survivors reaching the resistance strongholds and sharing stories of human compassion. The rescue had become legend among the free Vorthak, proof that not all alien species were as cruel as the hegemony. "He's proposing an alliance," Commander Hayes said, studying the tactical projections that were now appearing around them. "A coordinated strike against the conditioning centers while the hegemony forces are spread thin, dealing with the resistance." Sarah watched Kethvar carefully as he continued to refine the tactical display. The alien's body language had changed dramatically since their first encounter. Gone was the desperate, wounded creature hiding in maintenance corridors. In its place was a being of obvious intelligence and strategic capability, someone who understood the complexities of interstellar warfare better than most human commanders. "The question is whether we can trust him," Admiral Morrison said bluntly. "This could be an elaborate trap." Kethavar paused in his manipulation of the display and turned toward the Admiral. For a moment, Sarah was afraid the alliance might crumble before it truly began. Then the alien did something that surprised everyone in the room. He laughed. It was a sound unlike anything in their files, melodic and warm, completely at odds with the fearsome reputation of his species. The laughter was followed by a gesture that needed no translation. Kethavar removed the last remaining neural implant from his body. The device that Sarah's scans had revealed was connected to his motor functions. Without it, he would be unable to use his claws as weapons. He was literally disarming himself as a gesture of trust. "Sir," Dr. Sarah Chen said formally, "I recommend we accept this alliance. The potential intelligence value alone is worth the risk." Admiral Morrison stood up and walked around the holographic display, studying the tactical information from every angle. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of command decision. "Very well, but we do this incrementally. Small operations first, building trust through shared success." Kethavar nodded emphatically and immediately began modifying the display to show a much smaller operation. A single conditioning center on the outer edge of hegemony space, lightly defended and containing fewer than 100 prisoners. It was perfect as a test mission. "How many of his people are we talking about rescuing if this alliance succeeds?" Morrison asked. The answer that appeared in the holographic display made everyone in the room fall silent. The numbers were staggering. Millions of Vorthak scattered across dozens of conditioning centers, all waiting for liberation. And they weren't the only species being held. The hegemony had been enslaving entire civilizations, turning them into unwilling weapons for their expansion. Sarah looked at Kethavar, who was watching the human reactions carefully. In his multifaceted eyes, she saw something that reminded her why she had become a scientist in the first place. Hope. Not just for his own people, but for the possibility that different species could work together to overcome seemingly impossible odds. "When do we start?" she asked quietly. Admiral Morrison smiled grimly. "We start now. Commander Hayes, I want a joint task force assembled within 6 hours. Dr. Chen, you'll serve as our liaison with Professor Kethavar. And Professor," he said, addressing the alien directly, "welcome to the war against our real enemy." Kethavar's response was another song, but this time it was clearly celebratory. The holographic display filled with images of Vorthak and humans working together, a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. As Sarah watched the alien professor plan humanity's first joint operation with his people, she realized that everything she had believed about the nature of war was about to change forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she checked her environmental suit one final time. In all her years as a xenobiologist, she had never imagined she would be boarding an alien rescue ship headed toward enemy territory. Beside her, Kethavar moved through his own pre-mission preparations with practiced efficiency, his 6 arms working simultaneously to calibrate weapons and communication devices. "Still can't believe I'm doing this," muttered Lieutenant Torres, the Marine who had volunteered to accompany them on what everyone was calling the most dangerous diplomatic mission in human history. The rescue ship itself was a marvel of Vorthak, engineering sleek and organic-looking, its hull seeming to flow like liquid metal while maintaining rigid structural integrity. Kethavar had explained through their improvised translation system that it was grown rather than built, using biotechnology that humanity was centuries away from understanding. Approaching the conditioning center now, came the voice of Captain Jaketh through the ship's communication system. The Resistance commander had been initially skeptical of human involvement, but Kethavar's passionate advocacy had won him over. "Hegemony patrol schedules indicate we have a 6-hour window before their next security sweep." Sarah studied the tactical display that had become their primary communication tool. The conditioning center was smaller than the main facilities they had seen in earlier briefings, but it still held nearly 80 Vorthak prisoners. According to Kethavar's intelligence, Most were civilians who had been captured during raids on refugee convoys. The neural modification process takes approximately 7 days to complete, Kethvar explained through his holographic interface. These prisoners have been here for only 3 days, which means their original personalities are still intact. But we must move quickly. The ship shuddered slightly as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, Sarah could see a world that had once been beautiful. Crystalline forests and floating cities that matched the historical records Kethvar had shown them. Now it was scarred by mining operations and dotted with the brutal geometric structures that marked hegemony occupation. Contact, Captain Jaketh announced. Hegemony garrison responding to our approach. Broadcasting diplomatic immunity codes now. Sarah held her breath as they waited for the response. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would pose as a hegemony inspection team, using credentials that the resistance had stolen from a captured facility. Kethvar would play the role of a properly conditioned specimen being returned to active duty, while Sarah and Torres would masquerade as human advisors studying the conditioning process. Inspection team cleared for landing, came the cold, mechanical response from the planet's surface. Proceed to docking bay 7. As they descended toward the conditioning center, Sarah got her first clear look at the facility that had haunted Kethvar's nightmares. It was a sprawling complex of interconnected domes, each one designed to break down the psychological resistance of its prisoners. The architecture itself seemed designed to inspire hopelessness. Angular, oppressive structures that blocked out most of the natural light. Remember, Torres whispered, checking his disguised weapon one final time. We go in quiet, extract the prisoners, and get out before anyone realizes what's happening. No heroics. Kethvar's response was a low, melodic hum that Sarah had learned to recognize as agreement. But she could see the tension in his posture as they approached the place where so many of his people had been broken and transformed into weapons. The docking process was surprisingly routine. Hegemony efficiency, Sarah realized, made them predictable in their procedures. The facility's automated systems guided their ship into the landing bay without requiring any direct interaction with the guards. Inspection team, report to Processing Center Alpha for briefing, announced a synthesized voice over the facility's communication system. Bring Specimen 847 for demonstration purposes. Specimen 847. Sarah felt sick as she realized that was how the hegemony referred to Kethvar, not as a person, but as a numbered object. The alien professor's earlier enthusiasm had been replaced by grim determination as they prepared to enter the facility, where he had likely been tortured. The corridors of the conditioning center were sterile and cold, lined with monitoring equipment that tracked every movement. Sarah noticed that Kethvar deliberately altered his walking pattern to match the stilted gait of a conditioned specimen, his natural grace replaced by mechanical precision. Greetings, inspection team, said the hegemony overseer who met them at the processing center. The alien was tall and willowy, with silver skin and emotionless black eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their appearance. I am Coordinator Vexhall. You are here to observe the refinements to our neural conditioning protocols? Torres stepped forward, his face a mask of professional indifference. That is correct. Command wants to ensure maximum efficiency in our specimen processing. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral as they were led through the facility. The conditioning chambers they passed were filled with Vorthak individuals in various stages of the horrific transformation process. Some still retained enough awareness to look up as they passed, their eyes pleading silently for help that had never come. As you can see, Coordinator Vexhall said with obvious pride, our latest techniques have reduced conditioning time by 30%, while maintaining full behavioral compliance. Specimen 847 here was processed through this very facility. Kethvar played his role perfectly, standing motionless and staring straight ahead as the overseer discussed him like a piece of equipment. But Sarah caught the almost imperceptible signals he was sending, subtle movements that indicated the locations of security stations and guard positions. Impressive, Torres commented. What is the current prisoner population? 73 specimens currently undergoing processing. We expect to complete the current batch within 4 days and transfer them to combat units. 4 days. Sarah's heart raced as she realized how close they were cutting their timing. The prisoners they had come to rescue would be lost forever if they waited much longer. We would like to inspect the specimens individually, Sarah said, hoping her voice sounded appropriately clinical. Command has requested detailed physiological assessments. Coordinator Vexhall nodded approvingly. Of course. We shall begin with the most recent arrivals. They retain enough cognitive function to provide interesting baseline comparisons. As they were led deeper into the facility, Sarah caught Kethvar's eye for just a moment. The alien professor gave her the slightest nod. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Soon they would be in position to begin the most critical rescue operation in either species' history. But first, they had to survive the next hour without being discovered. The facility's security systems were sophisticated, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them with more than casual interest. In her earpiece, she could hear Torres's steady breathing and the subtle sounds of the rescue ships positioning themselves for extraction. Now, Coordinator Vexhall said as they approached the main conditioning chamber, let me show you our greatest achievement, the complete neural restructuring of a former university professor into a perfect biological weapon. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the overseer was describing Kethvar's own conditioning process. Beside her, the alien professor remained motionless, but she could see the fury building in his multifaceted eyes. They were about to discover just how much of his original personality had survived the hegemony's attempts to destroy it. Sarah's heart pounded as Coordinator Vexhall led them into the main conditioning chamber, a vast dome filled with rows of containment pods. Inside each transparent cylinder, a Vorthak individual floated in a specialized fluid while neural modification devices worked to reshape their minds. The sight was so horrific that Sarah had to bite her tongue to keep from crying out in rage. These specimens represent various stages of the process, the overseer explained with detached scientific interest. Note how their aggressive responses have been enhanced while higher cognitive functions are systematically suppressed. Kethvar remained perfectly still, but Sarah noticed his breathing had become more shallow. Through their improvised communication system, he had told her that this was the same chamber where his own conditioning had taken place. Being here again must have been like walking through a nightmare made real. Fascinating, Torres commented, his voice steady despite the horror around them. What is the success rate of the full conditioning process? 97%, Vexhall replied proudly. The few failures are typically due to unusually strong psychological resistance. Those specimens are terminated and recycled. Sarah's scientific training kept her focused even as her humanity recoiled from what she was witnessing. She needed to gather intelligence about the facility's layout and security protocols while appearing to conduct a routine inspection. Every detail could be crucial for the rescue operation that was about to begin. I noticed some variations in the neural modification patterns, she observed, studying a nearby containment pod. Are different personality types processed differently? Indeed. Scholars and scientists like this one, Vexhall gestured toward a pod containing what appeared to be an elderly Vorthak, require more extensive cognitive restructuring. Their capacity for independent thought makes them particularly resistant to conditioning. Kethvar's subtle signal indicated that they had gathered enough information about this section of the facility. It was time to move toward the newer arrivals, the prisoners they had actually come to rescue. Sarah checked her chronometer and felt a chill of anxiety. They had been inside for 43 minutes, leaving them with less than an hour before the rescue ships would have to extract them. We should examine the recent arrivals now, Torres suggested casually. Our report needs to include data on the initial conditioning phases. As they moved through the facility, Sarah became aware of increased activity among the hegemony guards. Security patrols seemed more frequent than before, and several technicians were clustered around monitoring stations that hadn't been active during their arrival. Is there a problem with the facility's systems? She asked Coordinator Vexhall. The overseer's expression tightened slightly. A minor communication anomaly. Our external sensors detected unusual energy signatures in the orbital approach corridors. Probably just solar interference, but security protocols require investigation. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The resistance ships had been detected. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and they still hadn't reached the prisoners they had come to rescue. Worse, if the hegemony discovered the true nature of their inspection team, they would all be captured or killed. Kethvar must have sensed the change in situation because he began moving with more purpose. Guiding them through the facility's corridors with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. His supposedly conditioned behavior became slightly more animated, as if the proximity to other Vorthak was awakening suppressed aspects of his personality. "The holding area for new arrivals is through here," Vexhall said, leading them toward a heavily secured section of the facility. "These specimens have not yet begun the conditioning process, so they retain full cognitive function. They can be quite difficult to manage." The moment they entered the holding area, Sarah felt the emotional impact like a physical blow. Dozens of Vorthak individuals were confined in energy cages, their eyes still bright with intelligence and hope. Many showed signs of recent capture, injuries from battles, exhaustion from long journeys and cramped transport ships. "As you can see," the overseer continued, "we maintain strict containment protocols until conditioning begins. These specimens are particularly dangerous because they retain their natural problem-solving abilities." One of the prisoners, a young Vorthak with distinctive scarlet markings along her arms, looked up as their group passed, her eyes fixed on Kethvar, and Sarah saw a flicker of recognition pass between them. The professor's carefully maintained conditioning facade cracked for just a moment, revealing the desperate hope underneath. "This one appears to recognize specimen 847. Vexhall observed with clinical interest. "Fascinating. They may have known each other before capture. Such connections are usually completely severed by the conditioning process." Sarah realized they had reached the critical moment of their mission. The prisoners were here, within reach, but they were also surrounded by security systems and guards. Any attempt at rescue would have to be perfectly coordinated with the extraction teams waiting outside. "I'd like to conduct individual examinations," she said, hoping to buy them time to plan their next move. "Can the containment fields be temporarily disabled for medical access?" "Only with proper authorization codes," Vexhall replied, "and never for more than one specimen at a time. Security protocols are quite strict." As if summoned by his words, an alarm began sounding throughout the facility. Red warning lights bathed the holding area in an ominous glow as the automated systems announced, "Security breach detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. Lockdown protocols are now in effect." Coordinator Vexhall's demeanor changed instantly from scientific detachment to sharp suspicion. "This is highly irregular. Inspection teams do not typically coincide with security incidents." Sarah saw Torres's hand move slowly toward his concealed weapon while Kethvar positioned himself between the humans and the now hostile overseer. The carefully planned infiltration was about to become a desperate fighting retreat. "I assure you, Coordinator, we have no knowledge of any security situation," Torres said calmly. But Sarah could see the tension in his posture as he prepared for combat. Vexhall was no longer listening. His attention was fixed on a communication device that was displaying urgent messages from the facility's command center. "Resistance ships in system. Coordinated attack pattern. Possible infiltration team." The overseer's black eyes snapped toward their group with sudden understanding. "You are not an inspection team." Kethvar dropped his conditioning facade entirely, his natural grace and intelligence flooding back as he stepped protectively in front of his human companions. When he spoke, it was in perfect hegemony standard language, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had once been a respected professor. "No, Coordinator Vexhall, we are a rescue team, and your facility's reign of horror ends today." The holding area erupted into chaos as the imprisoned Vorthak realized that salvation had finally arrived. But with security alarms blaring and lockdown protocols engaging, Sarah knew that their real battle was just beginning. The next few minutes were a blur of violence and desperate heroism that would be remembered in both human and Vorthak military histories. Torres drew his plasma rifle and immediately engaged the hegemony guards flooding into the holding area, while Kethvar moved with fluid grace to the containment control systems. His 6 arms worked simultaneously, his recovered scientific knowledge allowing him to bypass security protocols that had taken the resistance months to break. "Sarah, get behind the energy barriers," Kethvar called out as he began systematically disabling the prisoner containment fields. The moment each cage deactivated, the freed Vorthak inside immediately joined the battle, their natural combat abilities returning despite their recent captivity. Sarah found herself crouched behind an overturned equipment console, watching in amazement as the rescue operation unfolded. The previously helpless prisoners had transformed into a coordinated fighting force, using their knowledge of hegemony tactics to anticipate guard movements and neutralize threats with minimal casualties. Extraction teams. This is Torres. The lieutenant spoke into his communicator between bursts of weapons fire. Package location confirmed. Beginning immediate extraction of all prisoners. The facility's walls suddenly shook as resistance ships began their assault on the conditioning center's outer defenses. Through the tactical displays scattered around the chamber, Sarah could see that this rescue operation had grown into something much larger, a full-scale liberation offensive that was hitting multiple hegemony facilities. Simultaneously, Coordinator Vexhal had taken cover behind a monitoring station, frantically trying to contact his superiors for reinforcement. His mechanical composure had completely cracked as he realized that his supposedly perfect security system was being dismantled by the very specimens he had been conditioning. This is impossible, he kept repeating. The neural modifications are irreversible. Specimen 847 cannot retain cognitive function after full processing. Kethavar paused in his liberation of the prisoners to address the overseer directly. That's where your science failed, Coordinator. You underestimated the power of connection. Every moment of torture you inflicted was balanced by the memory of kindness from others. You cannot condition away hope. The young Vorthak with scarlet markings, the one who had recognized Kethavar earlier, approached Sarah's position. Despite the chaos around them, her movements were graceful and controlled, showing none of the aggressive conditioning that should have been developing. You are the human who saved Kethavar, she said in accented but clear standard. I am Veltara, student of xenobiology at the University of Kethavel. My professor told us stories of the strange aliens who showed mercy to our people. Sarah felt tears forming as she realized she was speaking to one of Kethavar's former students. The bonds between teacher and pupil had survived capture, torture, and the hegemony's attempts to destroy their very identities. We're getting all of you out of here, Sarah promised, then spoke louder to address all the freed prisoners. Resistance ships are standing by for immediate evacuation. We need to reach the landing bays. The liberated Vorthak quickly organized themselves into groups, with the strongest protecting those still recovering from their ordeals. Despite everything they had endured, they moved with the disciplined efficiency of trained scientists and scholars, rather than the mindless aggression the hegemony had tried to instill. Kethavar completed his work at the control systems and rejoined their group, his multifaceted eyes bright with an emotion Sarah was learning to recognize as fierce joy. All prisoners freed. The facility's conditioning chambers are also disabled. It will take months to repair the damage. Professor, Veltara said urgently, what about the other centers? The ones we saw during transport? There are thousands more of our people being held. I know, Kethavar replied, his voice carrying both sadness and determination. But today we have proven that liberation is possible. The alliance between our peoples will free them all. As they fought their way through the corridors toward the extraction point, Sarah marveled at how quickly the impossible had become reality. Just days ago, she had been hiding from what she thought was a mindless monster. Now she was part of an interspecies alliance that was reshaping the entire war. The landing bay was a scene of controlled chaos as resistance ships arrived to collect the freed prisoners. Human and Vorthak crews worked together with the seamless coordination of natural allies. Their earlier distrust replaced by shared purpose. Dr. Chen, Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through her communicator. Outstanding work down there. Intelligence reports that the hegemony is pulling forces from 12 systems to respond to our coordinated strikes. We've given the resistance the breathing room they needed. Sarah watched as Kethavar helped load the last of the freed prisoners aboard the evacuation ships. Many of them were his former colleagues and students, academics and researchers who had been targeted specifically because their knowledge made them valuable as weapons. What happens now? She asked as their own ship prepared for departure. Kethavar's response came through their holographic communication system, showing images of joint human Vorthak research stations, cooperative military operations, and what appeared to be peaceful contact with other alien species who had been fighting the hegemony's expansion. Now we build something new, he said. Your species and mine, working together as we should have from the beginning. The hegemony chose to make enemies of us both. They succeeded only in creating the alliance that will defeat them. As their ship lifted away from the liberated conditioning center, Sarah looked back at the facility that was now burning brightly against the alien sky. It had been a place of horror, designed to break minds and destroy hope. But it had also been the birthplace of an alliance that would echo through galactic history. Months later, Sarah would find herself aboard the first joint human-Vorthak research vessel, working alongside Kethvar and his former students to decode the technology of other enslaved species. The war against the hegemony continued, but it was no longer a conflict between confused enemies. It had become exactly what it should have been from the beginning, a struggle for freedom fought by allies who understood that their greatest strength came from their diversity. And sometimes, late at night during their deep space missions, Sarah would find Kethvar curled up beside her workstation, having fallen asleep while they collaborated on translation protocols. The sight never failed to remind her of that first moment in the maintenance corridor, when fear had given way to compassion and changed the course of galactic civilization forever. The ferocious alien war beast had indeed disappeared, not because it had ever truly existed, but because understanding had revealed the gentle scholar who had always been hiding underneath the hegemony's cruel conditioning. In its place was something far more powerful, a friend, an ally, and proof that the universe's greatest victories belonged to those who chose hope over fear.